Hi, today I'm here with Dr. Neal Lester, Foundation Professor of English and Founding Director of Project Humanities at Arizona State University. Thanks so much for being here with us.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
So today's discussion is going to be straight talk about the N-word. And I am going to let you take it from here and occasionally jump in with some questions. So,
all right. Well, thank you again. It's interesting. Some people say that title, which I've used in various capacities as workshops, keynotes, etc., that how can it be straight talk if you're not naming the word? And I say, well, part of this is because I'm choosing not to say it. I think when I say the N word, people know exactly what that is. And so there's no reason for me to give that breath. Not taking, making it a euphemism that takes the sting out of it, because the word is there. And it also speaks to a kind of performative part of the word, whether we write it or say it or spell it out and put asterisk where the G's are, we know what it is. And I just have no interest in saying it in the same way that I don't have any interest in saying that Washington football team that just changed its name. That's a personal choice, and it's about language and the degree to which I am controlling or making an effort to control the language rather than having the language control me.
Okay, so why don't you tell us a little bit about the history?
Well, I'm not a historian, but as a literary scholar, I certainly have to engage history. And the history is so available that I don't spend a whole lot of time talking about history. In fact, what I say about history as it relates to my perspective and approach to this conversation is that if we talk about the, say, mid-1500s, when the Portuguese and the Spanish invaded Africa, there was this sense that those Africans they saw were different. And they named them initially quite neutrally based on what they saw, Black, but it became Negro. By 1619, that had clearly become a negative association and label with people who looked a certain way. And to this day, that still association, whether it's covert or overt, connected with Black, still exists. So Black is criminal, Black is ugly, Black is dangerous, Black is negative, and it's embedded in the language, Black ball, Black male, Black hole, Black magic. And that has been perpetuated through all kinds of systems. So for me, what makes sense to me is to start with this history where that word, while it was like neutral for a millisecond, immediately became a source of difference and negativity associated with that difference. So that has persisted, and that has also complicated for many how this word is being used and how language evolves or not based on the experience of those who are being labeled by that language. I go back to Toni Morrison, this whole notion of reclaiming, or I'm sure you must have heard, as I hear all the time, there are many, many people, particularly people who look like me and who are younger, who claim that this word has been taken back and it's a term of endearment. Well, there's nothing else that people can say about that, because what they use is a kind of erroneous explanation about spelling it, whether it's the hard R or the A at the end, and that's nonsensical, because the history of slave narratives and minstrel songs show precisely that word being used and spelled with the A. What further complicates that, which is why I'm still learning about that, is that I see now in social media, Black people, and it's a gendered conversation, often Black men, young Black men, upset with police or somebody in authority, they'll call them that word with the A in it. It is not used as a term of endearment. So there's so many sort of misconceptions that come out of history that is not that complicated in terms of how the word is being used, and this notion that you can take something back that you never owned.
Can you explain what the hard R and the A mean?
Yeah, well, the hard R is the NIGG, the one that we know that was, if a white person says it, then we know that that's a bad word. However, since hip hop and NWA, there was this sense that you could somehow take it back. And if you spelled it with the A rather than the ER, it was somehow reclaiming it. A GA, but as long as it wasn't the hard R, then it was not as problematic. Well, that in and of itself is just blatantly untrue. There are minstrel songs that we now know as Disney tunes that spelled it with the GA and GAH. And folks who somehow think that that's some clever way of reclaiming it are grossly mistaken.
Did you say Disney songs?
Oh yeah, minstrel songs like "Shoe Fly Don't Bother Me" or "Jim Crack Corn." There are all kinds of ways in which, you know, Disney tunes are those minstrel songs. And those minstrel songs, and they don't necessarily have that word, the N word, in the first verse that we often sing. It's often in that second or third verse. And then people say, well, we don't sing it. And I say, well, but there's several verses to Amazing Grace. Just because we don't sing them doesn't mean that those verses aren't there and they're still part of the song.
Because it's so prevalent in music right now.
Yes.
So there's a lot of tension around someone singing the song who's white.
Right.
So how do we deal with that in a society where some can and some can't?
Well, there are a couple of things going on in that. And one is, I think we all do that rather mindlessly because we're listening to the rhythm, we're listening to other things and not the words, or we're getting the words wrong. I did that with Brown Sugar by Rolling Stones. That's of our generation. And once you listen to that song and you see that it's really about glorifying violence against presumably a Black enslaved woman, I can't listen to that song again, even though it has this upbeat and I kind of like the Rolling Stones. Once you hear those songs, I can't hear them the same way, so I stopped listening to them. The same thing with Robin Thicke's Blurred Lines. It perpetuates rape culture. So even though I like the beat, that's not a song that I'm connected with. Or Baby It's Cold Outside. So there are ways in which once we know, we can't unknow that. Relative to the singing of the songs, I think people have to figure out, first of all, you know, if what we are singing has somehow become part of us and suggests to us that we're not really being critical, then that seems to be a problem. So here's the example. If you're singing along a song and it has a word in it, you will know it has the N word in it. That's not going to slip through. Now, some of the other lessons about homophobia, some of the lessons about misogyny may potentially slip by, but you're going to know if it has the N word in it. Because the whole sort of genre where one expects that gangsta language to be there. Now, the problem becomes it's complicated because on the one hand, we want to hold the artist responsible, and there is a responsibility there. And I remember Jay-Z saying at one point when Blue Ivy, his daughter, was born, that he was going to stop using the B word. Well, I wanted him to extend that in his songs. I wanted him to extend that to the N word because Blue Ivy could also be called that. So I've not heard him talk about that. In fact, he's one of those who tries to defend that. The problem with this is that it really is about performance, because if it comes out of your mouth, then you have said it. And I can think of a wonderful with Larry David from Curb Your Enthusiasm, where he's in a bathroom stall and he's listening to two people on a phone. And one of the persons who's in the room with him says the N word, and he's so stunned by this that he runs back out of this restaurant bathroom to talk to his table partner, and he's describing what he heard because he's so horrified. And just as he's actually saying the word, the Black waiter walks by. Even though he is recounting that, it still came from his mouth. And the same thing is part of what happens in classrooms now when white teachers are somehow reading from a text. It jars the education of some students because that's all they hear. And when you've got a moment where the person in that classroom is the authority figure and it comes out of your mouth, then it shuts down the potential learning for some students. So it really is about the performance. It's not a rule except to say, I'm not going to say it. And I'm also not going to sing it. So to me, it's not that complicated. These songs are not controlling us. And once you know, you can't unknow that.
Well, so I think the other thing is to say that because it's hard to do doesn't mean we don't do it, right? Like there are many things in our world right now that, I mean, we morph all the time. Our language morphs.
Yes, exactly.
Right. So,
exactly.
So we can all do it, but I think the confusing message is that some of the people can do it and some of the people can't do it. And so that in a school setting can be really confusing to the kids.
Well, you know what's interesting to me though is that's where the critical conversations are not happening though, because there are all kind of rules about what people can and can't do. And what I'm learning during this pandemic is there are certain people who don't want to be told what to do at all, even if it's a matter of wearing a mask. So part of this is the extent to which Black people have been forever told what to do and have been expected to do it. So there's this clamoring for this word, which one might argue is also a way of exemplifying double consciousness, where Black people have internalized how white people have talked and thought about us negatively, so that we are now looking at ourselves negatively. The other part of that is that once we sort of know this, you can't unknow this. There are ways in which we are continually evolving and changing, just as we talked about before the segment started with the pronouns, and recognizing that we don't have to use he just because we don't know the gender. In fact, that's often inappropriate to sort of reference gendered language when we don't know the identities. And then the question becomes, why do we need to know that? So I don't know that people are confused. I think people may disagree. That's what I've often seen, is they say things like, oh, there's a double standard there. Oh, why is it that Black people can use it, but white people can't? And I've actually seen school systems that have policies, or at least think about having policies, where Black people can say it, but white people can't say it. That's ridiculous to me. And I would want that to be treated in the same way that we would talk about homophobic or misogynistic or ageist or any other ways that people are disparaged in language that is being used. So I personally
you would say in school, nobody should use it.
said nobody should use it. And now what you do in the space of your personal life and your home is up to you, but not in the course of a classroom or not in the space of the work. And there are lawsuits at historically Black institutions, as well as others who have been in governmental positions where it's inappropriate. This is an equal opportunity epithet. Even if someone who doesn't look like me and who looks like you has an intimacy with me, say that we're best friends and we're walking around, you could be called an N-word lover. So even though you may not be called the N-word, you could be an N-word lover. And then there are other ways in which that word has sort of, it's an adjective, it's a descriptor, it's a noun, it's everything.
So why did that word become popular in rap music?
I think in one way there was this sense that identity was under attack, and keep in mind that this originated from these Black men who were reclaiming a certain kind of bravado in this music. And I also want to just clarify as a footnote that not all rap has the N-word. There's conscious rap that doesn't have that. And sometimes there's a certain sort of genre that we call sort of gangster rap. That's a certain kind of posturing. So there's a way in which claiming that word was a way of claiming identity. But I also say that it's not unlike those who were enslaved when they would get together in antebellum times, and they would sit on the plantations and talk about whose master was the better master, not recognizing that they were all being owned as property by somebody. So in me, I think it's an interesting study in how Black people have tried to claim ourselves and how we've tried to name ourselves, and not understanding fully the history of that particular naming. So there are ways in which, if we move from Black, and notice that we're now capitalizing the B according to AP English, but also we went from colored to Afro-American, had Negro, but those were Black people naming ourselves. That N-word was not something that was a name that we created for ourselves. And so I think in many ways, it's a clamoring for an identity that is whole in a space where that is continually being pounced upon and emasculated. And that's why I say this conversation is often very gendered and very much about masculinities, which is not to say that it is not used by others, but there's something about it that is specifically about men using that word, and males.
So do you have anything in closing to add?
Yes, I love the thought that we think about what comes out of our mouths. And I love Maya Angelou's kind of thoughts about that when she says something like, words are things. And I wish that there was a way that we could measure that. We have to know that words, we have to be careful how we use words. Words can get into our carpet, and they can get into our hardwood floors and into our curtains. And if we're not careful, those words get into us. If we are not vigilant about the words we use and the words that we allow to be used in our presence. So words have always mattered, and they continue to matter. And this is a conversation not just about this word, but about any word that dehumanizes and allows people not to exercise their full humanity.
Dr. Neal Lester, thank you so much for being here with us.